Hello, everyone. So today we're going to continue our journey in AP European history here in the Enlightenment and talk about the art, music, and literature of this particular time period. Decent amount to do, so let's just dive right in. So, as far as art is concerned, one of the big things that we had going on at this time was Rococo, which is going to be a little bit different than some of the styles that we'd seen before. We're going to have an emphasis on grace and gentle action. So, we're not going to be as I guess dynamic maybe as some of the other things in the past. They're not going to be really big on strict geometric patterns throughout, especially in the architecture stuff. Just in general, some of the things that we're going to see are going to be like natural lines of the world, like things like seashells and flowers and interlacing designs, and again this like graceful curves and designs and stuff like that. And there's going to be a big focus art wise on happiness and love. That's going to be kind of like a lot of the themes that we're going to see in some of these paintings. And so here's just a great example of that: the Happy Accidents of the Swing by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, I think. Sure. And that's the whole idea. You see this woman, she's having a good time, and then you got the guys that are swinging her back and forth here, and we've got all these flowers, and everything's kind of curvy, and that's just the general kind of theme of what we have going on here. Now, probably the biggest guy is Antoine Watteau. He is kind of like the big Rococo guy. He had a very brief but really influential career. He died sadly at the age of 36, so we think of tuberculosis. So that was tragic there. He did lots of paintings and drawings. Now I have a painting here, but his drawing is super important because that kind of really established that as in this more modern era as a art form as well. And we will see more and more artists start to do drawings after Watteau is done. And the way that he depicted backgrounds, if you see everything back here, it's like almost a little hazy. It's not particular, like you can't see all the leaves of the trees, or these are mountains back here. And that's going to be really influential on Impressionists in the future, and again, which we will talk about when we get there. But he also influenced fashion, like the women on how he depicted their dresses. If you see the woman right in the middle here in the pilgrimage to Cythera, and Corthera, I'm sorry, and this woman right here, you actually had like dresses. The Watteau dress became a big thing in interior design and theater costumes and poetry, and actually much later film. So here's a guy, and this is what can show you the influence of art, okay? Because it's not just this one painting or the paintings that are beautiful, which don't get me wrong, they are, but that they can influence so many other aspects of society, okay? And again, these ideas of fashion and theater and interior design, and that's where we have kind of the power of art, and that's what Rococo really is going to do at this time. Now, we also have some architectural things, okay, is what Rococo is going to do. It's going to take some of these new, softer ideas and blend it with some of the building styles that we saw in the Baroque period, but we're going to get some new twists. Like, for instance, the Palace of Versailles was really huge, and others in nobility, which we're going to get to, is their job here, if you will, is going to create grand homes for themselves. And I'm going to give you some examples of that as we move forward here. In places like Austria, Sweden, German nobles as well, Russian nobles and leaders, they're all going to be about building just these fanciful homes for themselves. And probably the guy that is the head of this, or the guy that's really kind of at the forefront for architecture, is a gentleman you see there on the right, Balthasar Neumann. Okay, he is the big name, and he's known for a couple different places. So the first is the Viersenhagelen. I think that's right. It's probably wrong, but this is the Church of the 14 Saints in Austria. And if we look here, does it let me get closer? Yes, you can see the inside. And again, you can see some of the things from Baroque style period, but also, we have a lot of this gold. That was a big thing at this time. You see the bright white colors, lots of curves and whatnot. If I go over here, same thing. This is the facade of the church. And so that became kind of one of the big examples of that. And then you also have the residence, which is also in Austria here. So if we get closer, we have the outside. So of course it's kind of this big imposing building here, but we've got we got ivy, and we've got all sorts of different shrubberies going on. We go to the inside, again, this bright white. We see all the steps, and again, the grandness and the majesty of everything. And then again here, we have another room in which people would have, what's the word I'm going to look for? Audiences and stuff like that. And so really, really impressive of what we're seeing in architecture as well. Now, the last part of this also at this time, which went along with Rococo, was Neoclassicism. It was super popular in France. And the idea is to capture the simplicity and dignity of ancient Greece and Rome. And the idea is just some of those themes are coming back again, okay? Basically, this was really influenced by archaeology. New rounds of excavations in like Rome and in places particularly like Pompeii and Herculaneum are discovered. And so everybody kind of got like reignited on the excitement of Greece and Rome again. And one of the best known paintings here by Jacques-Louis David is The Oath of the Horatii. As you can see, we've got our Roman things, and we got our shadows and bright reds and whatnot, and really trying to bring that back. And so, and that's the interesting thing that we see about art. Yes, you've got some of the new styles, and you get adjustments, and we're coming off of like things like Mannerism and stuff like that. But at the same time, you also have themes from the past also work their way back in, and that's something we see all the time. Now, music is going to get really big here, okay? This is basically the formative years of what is known as classical music, okay? And we're also going to have things like opera, oratorio, the concerto, and symphonies. Like all of these things are really what it's going to be all about, okay? The Italians are going to be the first ones out, but very quickly the Germans, the English, Austrians. And again, the patron system is huge here. We talked about the wealthy already in building huge homes. And so the other kind of big thing that the wealthy are going to do is to pay these high-end composers to make music. And in a lot of ways, what this time period is going to bring us during the Enlightenment is just like what we saw in the Renaissance as far as like art and architecture was concerned. It's just you have all of these brilliant musicians, okay? We have this talent that is just going to be able to like feed off each other, and we're going to get some just remarkable music that is created that is still well known today, and some of the world's greatest musicians. So I'm going to go through a couple guys and just show you a little bit about them, and then play a little music as well. Okay, Johann Sebastian Bach, he's probably like the titan of this particular period, okay? His key position, actually, he was the director of church music at the Church of St. Thomas in Leipzig. Most people look at him as like the second most influential person in music after Beethoven, and we'll get to that a little bit later. What's really different with him was his structure of the music and the way that he put symphonies and the church music together, that this is going to be the basis of much music that follows him. They're like, well, this is how it should be arranged. These are the types of instruments we should have. His music was very complex, and it was very innovative, in that he was trying to bring in different types of instruments into symphonies that really hadn't been used before. And he's really big on blending, and as a lot of good music is, you hear what you like and then you try to put it together. And so Bach heard the Italian and French and German pieces, and then he was just creating a new thing. He doesn't seem to be as influential as as popular as other musicians, but his influence is kind of like to a staggering level, even higher than that. And his overall output was just absolutely huge. Okay, and that's kind of our fun fact of the day here. He put out over 800 pieces of music in his lifetime. It's just absolutely insane that he was able to do that. Okay, and so let's just give a listen to what we have here for Bach. Sorry to pause this. This is the St. Matthew's Passion. That's the name of this particular piece. So as you can see, a very beautiful piece of music that does go on for 2 hours and 54 minutes that you are more than welcome to watch the rest of. But, and that's why I have this on there. You guys can continue to listen to some of this music. It is absolutely beautiful. So, oops, sorry about that. So we're going to continue on here. We move along our way. There we go. Okay. Trying to figure out what Man, I guess they just really wanted to keep playing Bach. But that's all right. We're allowed to have technical difficulties, and we will continue to go on. Another big guy at this time is George Frederick Handel. He was actually born the same year as Bach in 1685, and he was really big in opera early on. And he actually will eventually be, and that's what kind of gets him his name out. And in 1712, he moves to England, where he ends up being patronized by the royal court, and he also writes music for public performances, and that's kind of a big thing here. A number of these guys would occasionally write pieces for the public just to come and listen. So like these free concerts, which is kind of a big thing today, a lot of the townships do, and that's really, really fantastic. And he was really a unique composer. He would do things in his work, like for instance in the piece Firework Music, the orchestra would be accompanied by 101 cannons to get the sound of fireworks and stuff like that. It's pretty impressive. Now, he wrote a lot of secular music, in other words, stuff that wasn't church-based, although his most famous work was his Messiah. And let's give that a little bit of a listen here. And this one we're actually going to listen to. Jump forward a little bit. Okay, and so as you see again, another great piece of work, and we're going to continue on our way, keep trying to continue on our way to Franz Joseph Haydn. Here's a great example of how the idea of patronage works. Most of the work he did were the Hungarian princes, the Esterházy brothers, and so he worked for them for most of his life. Another prolific guy, he did 104 symphonies along with string quartets and concerti and masses, etc. Also is really big on performing to the public, just like Handel was. And the big works that he's credited for are the Creation and the Seasons. So let's give a little bit of a listen to him.
Sieht wie vom Schropfen fällt der Schnee. In trüben Strömen sich ergießt.
And I think that's the interesting thing. A lot of people always think classical music is just music, that there's no lyric or singing, and that's not true. These guys were doing the operas and all sorts of music that was blending both instrumental and vocal music. All right, so as we're going to continue on here, and then the last musician of this era that we are going to talk about is, keep going here, is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He is probably the most popular and most famous of all of these guys. He was a child prodigy who was composing by the age of 5, and he actually gave his first harpsichord concert at the age of 6. His major issue in life was that he could never really find a steady patron, and he wandered around a bit. He had massive financial problems that kind of always plagued him. He wasn't particularly good with money either, and it really it makes him struggle. Okay. He would often give some personal concerts for like individuals or individual families. Opera or Italian comedic opera was really kind of what he was most known for, like the Marriage of Figaro, the Magic Flute, and Don Giovanni. He was just so gifted. He was, also was married and had children. But the financial woes is what always kind of caught up with him. He died when he was just 35, in tremendous debt, and he himself had actually become homeless. And he was really influential, especially in opera, and so many guys would mimic Mozart after his death in kind of this larger-than-life figure. But unfortunately, because of his early death, never really got to produce, I think, to the volume that he might have wanted to. With the Magic Flute. So we've got all sorts of stuff here. Again, then I would encourage you to continue to listen to the rest of these works. But we cannot forget the last part of this. We also have some literature going on at this time, and I promise the presentation's almost done. Literature, it really does come out of England. They are really the center of this, and we're going to get the English really get credited for like the modern novel as the main vehicle for fiction writing. So we're moving away from plays. So up to this point in European history, we had some novels here or there, but plays were really the big place for fiction, and now we're going to get novels here. Okay. And the thing about with novels is there's no real rules for structure or stuff like that. So you get lots of different people involved with it, and it will be very popular for women. And eventually, we'll see quite a few women writers. Eventually, like one of your early examples is from Samuel Richardson, which is Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, and this was the story of a servant girl's resistant to her master's attempts to seduce her. But the master eventually realizes that she's very intelligent and along with being attractive, and then in the end of just trying the whole seduction thing, actually courts and marries her instead, which is a little bit different than what people would see at the time. Henry Fielding was probably one of your top known authors at this time. His big book was The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling, which is the story about the adventures of a young kind of scoundrel but what was really important was the realism that it had here. That it was a true depiction of the hovels of London and the aristocrats, to give a really true sense of what life was like while still throwing some satire in there. And really in books in the 1800s, it gives us this wonderful understanding of really what those societies were like. Now, on a side note, Henry Fielding also created one of the first police forces in all of England. They were called the Bow Street Runners. He and his brother actually ran them, and they were magistrates, and they will actually help to form the beginning of police companies all throughout not only England but eventually in Europe. So that's kind of an interesting type of thing there. And then history becomes really, really broader in scope and more important. What we have are some new focuses here is that no longer are we just trying to focus on politics, but we want to get a true sense of the overall world, finding out about regular people, finding out about more day-to-day stuff. Voltaire actually also, we talked about him before, but he was also a historian. He wrote a history book known as The Age of Louis XIV, and in here he said, "It is not merely the life of Louis XIV that we propose to write. We have a wider aim in view. We shall endeavor to depict for posterity not the actions of a single man, but the spirit of men in the most enlightened age the world has ever seen." And the whole goal, he said here, was to describe the totality of past human experience. And the new ideas that we have present here is the ideas that history could help instruct people in the importance of the past, and that it can help us lead a more moral life in the future by seeing our mistakes. See, history is important. And the guy that probably wrote the biggest note, and this is still internationally famous today, guys, is the work by Edward Gibbon and his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which actually becomes the authoritative source for decades and decades after Rome. And his basically goal was to use this as a way to be positive and give people direction on how to avoid the fate of the Romans, okay, as well as getting into like a lot of the nitty gritty stuff. And some of his stuff is pretty accurate. He does have a bias though here. He hated Catholicism and the church, and he kind of overly focused on that as like the actual cause of the downfall of Rome. But we all know that biases do exist in writing, and we have to get used to that too, so we can learn that from Edward Gibbon's work as well. And so as you can see in this time period in the Enlightenment, so much going on, art, literature, and music, and we have many things going on in regular society, which we'll get to as well. Okay, so thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.